to him and his dogs. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
And we start with President Trump slamming the congressional resolution blocking his national emergency to fund the wall along the southern border. The president calling it, quote, dangerous and reckless as he issues the first veto of his presidency. Opponents calling his actions an overreach and not needed, but now it all goes back to Capitol Hill, setting up a new fight in the ongoing battle over border security. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Marthel Neville. The resolution now returns to the House, where lawmakers are expected to hold an override vote on March 26th. The president standing firm, though, insisting that the situation at the southern border is a real threat to national security.
Congress has the freedom to pass this resolution, and I have the duty to veto it, and I'm very proud to veto it. And I'm very proud, as I said, of a lot of Republican senators that were with me. And I'm also very proud of the House. The Republicans in the House voted overwhelmingly in favor of a secure border.
Let's go to Garrett Tinney. He's live at the White House with the latest. Hi, Garrett.
Hey, Arthel, good afternoon to you. The White House at this point is not concerned about Congress trying to override the president's veto, and at least for now, that is because the math is on their side. To override a veto, it requires a two-thirds majority in both the House and the Senate, and the House was about 40 votes short of that mark last month, and this week the Senate was short by 8. On Friday in the Oval Office, President Trump described the effort to end his national emergency as dangerous and insisted it is his constitutional duty to address what he describes as an invasion taking place on our southern border.
Congress's vote to deny the crisis on the southern border is a vote against reality. It's against reality. It is a tremendous national emergency. It is a tremendous crisis. We want border security. We want safety. We want no drugs. We want no human trafficking. Okay?
Over the next 10 days, Democrats plan to try and convince more Republicans to go against the White House, though they admit getting 40-plus Republicans to do that in the House will not be easy.
Now we're going to try to override the veto. I know that's an uphill battle. I know the math. I know what the math is. And, the question is very simple. Are we going to stand with the Constitution or are we going to stand with party loyalty? I want to stand with the Constitution.
One key element in whether or not they're successful in this effort will be the details of which military construction projects President Trump plans to take money from to fund the construction of his border wall. Since a number of Republican lawmakers have been concerned projects in their states could be affected. But even then, at this point, overriding the veto is still seen as a long shot. And that's why Democrats are now looking into a number of other legislative options they have to counter the president on this effort. Arthel.
All right, Garrett Tinney, thank you very much. Eric?
Arthel, the battle over the border security drags on, both parties weighing on the political impact of the votes. For more on this, let's bring in Sagar Enjeti, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Sagar, an override, as we just heard from Garrett, pretty much not likely. What is the significance if, as is expected, the effort fails?
Well, even though it will fail, or even though it is likely to fail both in the House and in the U.S. Senate, there are a number of options that are available to lawmakers. They're looking at possibly joining the lawsuit that's organized by the state of California that's suing the president over the legality of the national emergency. They're also talking about simply just bringing up this vote every 6 months on congressional disapproval of the national emergency in order to force Republicans in both houses to take difficult votes. And at other turns, they're also looking at adding disapproval or using the power of the purse that exists in the House of Representatives to add disapproval votes or to block the funding that the president will try to use by their use of the appropriations process in the House. So this is not the end of this fight between the White House and between Congress on the national emergency and border security funding.
They fell 45 votes short. What if that narrows? Is that possible? What would be the significance if indeed the president picks up some more support?
Even if the vote does narrow, what this has is there's already been a rebuke by both houses of Congress. It is a defeat for the White House. Now, even if they did have a 2/3 override in the House of Representatives, which is very unlikely, the White House will be looking to whip that vote significantly in order to ensure its defeat. The president is unlikely to give what he said earlier today, as he did on the Mueller report, his permission to the GOP leadership in order to let Republicans vote for something. It's something that they would oppose strongly. But the significance, if the gap were to raise, would be even more of a rebuke to the White House in this situation.
And man, oh man, if the Democrats keep on every 6 months, renewing this is going to keep this a hot issue, and their opposition against it right on through the 2020 election.
Absolutely. It's a defining moment for both parties. Now, you see that many of the Republicans, some Republicans actually even sought a backup plan in order to make sure that they didn't have to vote for this resolution, because it is overwhelmingly politically popular with much of the president's base. He looks at it as a campaign issue, and they look at many of the Republicans who've rebuked him on this as betraying him on the issue of border security. Democrats know that Democrats know that Republicans do not want to take difficult votes against the president, especially whenever it comes to issues of constitutional principle, which don't always translate to the political battlefield in 2020.
Yeah, that very issue was brought up by the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Let me read you a quote from the Wall Street Journal, pretty much bluntly titled, "Trump loses the Senate. Democrats are united against the emergency. Let's stipulate that their motives are largely partisan. The GOP opposition is more sincere and significant because it comes at some political cost. It's never easy to vote against a sitting president of one's own party on such a high-profile issue as immigration. Mr. Trump should be careful not to test the limits of GOP Senate loyalty." What do you forecast that could mean in terms of this, the first time a block of GOP senators have bucked him? Could we see more of this in the future?
Yes, this week has been absolutely extraordinary in the break between Congress and the White House. You had the overwhelming majority you had almost the entire House of Representatives vote that the Mueller report should be public. You had the Congress disapprove and cut funding to the U.S.-backed effort, or the U.S. Saudi-backed effort in Yemen. And you also had the Congress disapprove of the president's national emergency at the border. You have a Congress that is absolutely reinserting itself in terms of its power of the purse and its ability to control U.S. funds abroad. And it's a major rebuke of the executive branch. A lot of Congress people that are talking here that they're refinding much of the powers that they have had and have exceeded to the executive branch over the last several decades.
And quickly, you think that's going to continue?
Yes, it will absolutely continue. The president and the White House are not backing down on this. They barely tried to whip the vote in the Senate on this resolution. They look at it as absolutely within their prerogative, and that's not something that will necessarily go over well with some of the constitutional Republicans in the Senate.
Well, it's the way the system was created by our founding fathers and continues today. This is an example of that. Sagar Enjeti of the Daily Caller. Sagar, always good to see you.
Thanks, Eric.
Of course. And tomorrow on Sunday Morning Futures, Maria Bartiromo sits down with Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He's chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. You know they'll be talking about this. We'll get his reaction to the president's first veto and what comes next in the border wall funding fight. That's 10 a.m. Eastern right here on the Fox News Channel. Arthel?
Eric, well, the chances of reaching a diplomatic breakthrough with North Korea not looking so good. The regime now threatening to pull out of talks with the United States following last month's summit in Vietnam between President Trump and Kim Jong-un that ended without an agreement. North Korea also weighing whether to resume its nuclear and missile testing. Jillian Turner has more now from Washington.
New concerns breaking this weekend about North Korea as the Trump administration scrambles this weekend to figure out Kim Jong-un's next move in the wake of yesterday's announcement. A Korean official disclosed that Kim is considering ditching negotiations with the U.S. altogether and resuming nuclear weapons testing, a worst-case scenario for the United States. The Secretary of State jumped in yesterday with a pointed reminder to Pyongyang.
In Hanoi, on multiple occasions, he spoke directly to the president and made a commitment that he would not resume nuclear testing, nor would he resume missile testing. So that's Chairman Kim's word. We have every expectation that he will live up to that commitment.
Talks between President Trump and Kim fell apart in Hanoi last month when they reached an impasse over financial sanctions. Trump has imposed 5 rounds of them so far during his presidency. North Korea continues to demand sanctions relief, something the U.S. is only willing to provide after Kim surrenders his nuclear stockpile of weapons and long-range missiles. Yesterday, a spokesperson accused the Trump team of taking a gangster-like stand.
I make this clear. The forceful stance of the U.S. will certainly make the situation more dangerous. Our supreme leadership will clarify its decision soon.
President Trump's administration has hung their hat and their hopes on the fact that North Korea's nuclear testing abated over the past year.
Hostages returned. We have them having stopped missile testing and nuclear testing. We are hopeful that we can continue to have conversation negotiations.
Everyone from the Secretary of State to the National Security Advisor to the President himself has proclaimed the cessation of testing to be their top achievement so far. So should the North resume, it'd be a major blow to their strategy, and worse still, a major threat to U.S. stability. Arthel?
Jillian Turner, thank you, Jillian.
And now a Fox's alert on that deadly and sickening rampage that occurred in New Zealand. The man accused of opening fire inside 2 mosques, killing 49 worshippers, well, he appeared in court today. The police are charging that suspect, who live-streamed the killings, well, they've charged him with murder, as the country reels with grief and searches for answers in this despicable crime. Kitty Logan has the latest developments. Kitty.
Hi, Eric. Well, this primary suspect is a 28-year-old Australian man. He was detained shortly after those shootings on Friday. Now, this apparently is the same man who claimed responsibility for the killings online. He also posted an anti-immigration manifesto outlining his motives. Now, courts in New Zealand ordered his face to be blurred. You can see that in this video. He was handcuffed and closely guarded. He's been remanded in custody until his next court appearance on April 5th. He's facing one murder charge so far, but the judge said he will be lightly charged over other deaths too. Now, meanwhile, forensics work at the scene of the shootings is continuing while police try to gather more evidence to support that court case. They're also trying to establish if anyone else may be linked to this main suspect. 41 people were killed at the first mosque that was targeted, the Al Noor Mosque. They were attending Friday prayers. Police say the suspect then drove to a second mosque and killed 7 more people there. One of the injured later died in hospital, and more than 30 are still being treated for gunshot wounds. A graphic video of the shooting at the Al Noor Mosque, that first mosque that was targeted, was streamed live on Facebook, as you say. It was then taken down, but it reportedly showed the suspect firing indiscriminately at worshippers, including women and children. And many of those victims were refugees who'd fled war-torn countries such as Syria and Afghanistan. And today, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern met with members of the Muslim community earlier to offer reassurance.
New Zealand is united in its grief, and we are united in our grief. And so I convey that message of love and support on behalf of New Zealand to all of you.
So now people in Christchurch are trying to come to terms with that grief and shock, laying candles and flowers at a makeshift memorial. New Zealand, of course, is a quiet, peaceful country, the shooting the worst in its history. And now it's on high alert. Although police believe that only one gunman was responsible for these killings, they still haven't ruled out any accomplices, and certainly they're keeping a watch out for any possible indications of any association or any further attacks. Back to you, Eric.
All right, Kitty, thank you so much. Meanwhile, in neighboring Australia, people are standing in solidarity with the victims. Take a look at this. It is the Sydney Opera House projecting a New Zealand silver fern on the building's iconic sails. The New South Wales Premier says the fern represents unity and compassion for the victims. The Premier saying the whole country is in mourning, adding, quote, "It is as though this has occurred on our own soil."
Very moving. And back here at home, a robbery at a famous Las Vegas casino leads to a shootout on the Strip, and one responding officer is lucky to be alive. We'll tell you how he survived. Also, states of emergency are declared throughout parts of the Midwest and plains as heavy rains and melting snow cause widespread problems. Nebraska's governor tweeting that historic flooding and extreme weather has hit nearly every region of the state, and the situation has now turned deadly. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is in the Fox Extreme Weather Center on the state of that threat. Adam?
Hey there. Unfortunately, we still see major flooding on the way across portions of Nebraska, Iowa, stretching into southern Wisconsin, when we're still talking about these floodwaters potentially rising over the course of the weekend. I'm going to be talking about that in my full forecast coming up after the break.
Rescue and evacuation efforts now underway in many areas of eastern Nebraska after a combination of heavy rain and snowmelt are causing rivers and creeks to overflow. And the trouble is spread out across communities in parts of the plains and Midwest. Nebraska's National Guard carrying out rescue operations for people trapped in the rising waters. Water breached a pair of levees north of Fremont, virtually cutting off the state's sixth largest city. And preparations are reportedly underway to shut down a nuclear power plant along the Missouri River. But the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency says there are no safety concerns at the plant. Let's get to meteorologist Adam Klotz. He is in the Fox Extreme Weather Center with the very latest. Adam?
Hey there, Arthel. Yeah, this is a huge area because we saw such big rain. On top of that rain, we're talking about areas that have seen a good amount of snow through the winter. Because of that rain, the snow melts, and then you start to see some serious flooding. This is our current river flood gauges across big portions here of the Midwest. Everything you're seeing, at least minor flooding. I do think that's only going to intensify. Now, some of these areas where it's a little thicker, you're talking about that being the Missouri River, back behind it, the Mississippi River. And if you look, these are the current gauges. We can look at our forecasted gauges, and it does look as though the water's only going to raise as we continue on through the weekend. So you start to see more of these red colors, more of these pink colors, which means we're getting up to moderate flooding, or we're getting up to major flooding in the next couple of days. And this all happening despite the fact that there is no rain anywhere on the way. We saw big storms the last couple of days, but now we're drying off. So there's a little bit of good news with this. Satellite and radar across this entire region. We're giving a chance for maybe this water to eventually run down over the course of the weekend, getting into early next week, as we'll be continuing to pay attention to this. Future radar shows mostly clear conditions, and I'll move on through it. You aren't seeing a whole lot across the center of the country Sunday into Monday. Now, as we start to look a little farther down the line, we are eventually going to see some more rain work back into this area. This is our precipitation models. It's taking you here into Tuesday, so dry from now, mostly anyways, until the middle of the week. But by the time we get into the middle of next week, another system's going to be sweeping across the middle of the country. This is going to bring some more rain. That should be enough time that we're allowed to let some of these water levels fall down just a little bit. But it's something we're certainly going to be paying attention to as we get closer and closer to that time frame. The only other good news we're talking about right now, in a lot of these areas, temperatures are still cold enough. We're not expecting to see a lot more snow melt. So these are the current temperatures here. They got a lot of snow, Arthel, over the course of the winter there in the center of the country, running up into the upper plains and upper Midwest. So that's something that will be melting, something we're going to be paying attention to. But as far as rain goes, and that's really the good news here going forward, it does look as though the rain is wrapping up, Arthel.
All right, Adam, thank you very much. And joining us by phone right now, we're going to bring in the mayor of Columbus, Nebraska, Jim Bulkley. Mayor Bulkley, thank you for joining us. I know you're very busy right now trying to help out the residents there in town. If you could tell us, I understand that some of the rainwaters have receded a bit, but what is the biggest threat still facing your city at this moment? Or do you have any residents trapped in their homes? What's the situation, sir?
Right now, Columbus is not in a dangerous situation, and even our surrounding county area, right around Columbus, the Platte County area, as far as residents trapped, those who had been trapped and we were aware of, with the National Guard help between Friday and Friday and Thursday night and Friday, we have gotten everybody out that had needed and had requested help. We have some people that are stranded, but they're safe. They're good people that just can't get out because roads have been washed out, but they're fine. And so You know, some people don't want to go either. When you ask them if they're okay, they say yes. So that's the situation here. We dodged the bullet very, very much so in the town of Columbus itself.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that you dodged the bullet. Are you helping with some of your neighboring cities in terms of resourcing, helping them with? I understand that they're still dealing with floodwaters.
There's a lot going on to our east. Yesterday, the Fremont into Omaha area really was getting hit hard with floodwaters. And at this point, we're not being asked for any assistance. I know some of the National Guard people that were here, the helicopters that were here, some of the rescue people that were giving us assistance, we're moving right on over that way. You know, one of the issues we have, and it's going to relieve itself tonight and into tomorrow, is for 3 days we were an island by ourselves. We could not get in or out of Columbus proper. So we had grocery stores that were concerned. We had gas stations that were concerned. So we are going to be able to get north later today. It may not be a straight line. Maybe you have to go a little east and a little north, a little west, a little north. But we're going to get out, and so we'll have some roads opening up, and that's a good thing.
Do you have power for those folks who decided to stay home and not evacuate?
Most of them did. Most of them it's just because maybe part of a road washed away and they couldn't get out. And you know, some people, when you say let's go and they say no, there's not much you can do.
Well, I understand that very well, sir.
We didn't have a lot of that, but there's always a few that want to stay with their belongings, and we did not have any mandatory evacuations. We had suggested evacuations in a few counties, low-lying areas.
Well, Adam Klotz saying that there's another system heading that way, so I hope that you again get lucky and dodge a bullet. A second time, Mayor Jim Buckley of Columbus, Nebraska, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to get the update. Bye.
And our best wishes to the folks undergoing that. Meanwhile, overseas, a bank was set on fire in Paris. That as those yellow vest protesters, they're clashing with police yet again, this time for the 18th weekend in a row. Firefighters had to rescue a mother and her child who lived in the apartment above the bank as the flames threatened to engulf their floor. In all, 11 people were injured, including 2 firefighters. Meanwhile, rioting continued along the city's famed Champs-Élysées. Police struggling to contain demonstrators. They used tear gas and water cannons after smoke bombs and other objects were thrown at officers. What now seems to be becoming a regular Saturday occurrence on the streets of Paris.
Eric, back here at home, authorities say a Las Vegas police officer is lucky to be alive after a shooting on the Strip last night. It happened at the Bellagio Hotel just before 10 p.m. Police say a man went into a poker cage area and demanded money from the clerk. He then ran outside and tried to steal a car, and police say that is when shots were fired.
The suspect was confronted by 4 Metro police officers, at which time the suspect then turned, pointed a firearm at one of our officers, and fired at least 1 round, striking our officer in the chest area. The officer had his bulletproof vest on, which probably saved his life, and has been treated medically and released.
The suspect was shot by another police officer and was taken to a hospital in critical condition.
Well, the Washington Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tees up a procedural vote on the Green New Deal. But that does not mean that one of the plan's main architects is really happy about it. We'll hear what Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has to say about the Republican leader's move. Plus, our panel on which party could ultimately benefit politically from this latest fight that is shaping up on Capitol Hill. And the 2020 presidential hopefuls, well, you know, they're fanning out across the country this weekend. Here's former Congressman Beto O'Rourke holding a rally in the Hawkeye State. We'll have the latest from the campaign trail straight ahead here on America's Newsroom.
The next president has to win in a way that unifies the country, brings the country together. You got to show up everywhere for everyone, write nobody off,
Well, former Congressman and 2020 presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, while he's stumping in Iowa right now, 2 days after officially launching his presidential campaign. The Texas Democrats in Waterloo at this moment. He's joined an already packed lineup of White House hopefuls, including several undeclared candidates. And New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, well, she's also hitting the campaign trail today. She's in another early voting state, that of New Hampshire. Meanwhile, former Vice President Joe Biden, well, he is causing a flurry because he's scheduled to speak tonight at a Democratic Party dinner in his home state of Delaware as we all await whether or not he will make another presidential run, as is widely speculated. Jeff Paul is following all this action. He's in our West Coast newsroom with the latest doings. Hi, Jeff.
Eric, it's another packed weekend for Democratic presidential hopefuls who are campaigning to be the name that carries the party in 2020. Now, as you take a look at this live look here, that is former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who is campaigning in Iowa right now. He spoke to a crowd at the Black Hawk County Democratic Party headquarters. A little earlier, he participated in a St. Patrick's Day 5K run. He took some questions after that run, most of them centering around health care, saying it's important that everyone has access to it.
Whether that's absolutely free for everyone up front, at one point or another, we're all going to have to pay for it. So I don't think any of this is going to be free, but I want to make sure that cost is not an object to obtaining your care, your prescription, or taking your child to a therapist.
Former HUD Secretary Julian Castro was just in Nevada last night. He spoke at a bar in downtown Las Vegas where he talked about his humble upbringing, saying he wants to make sure all Americans have the same opportunities to prosper. Castro also pledged to visit every single state during his run and sounded pretty confident about how he thinks his campaign will progress.
But I actually look forward to a moment that comes a little bit later in the day, in the afternoon, when it's customary for the incoming president to usher off the outgoing president on the White House lawn. Right before they go, I'm going to tell him, adios.
Even though he hasn't announced he's officially running, former Vice President Joe Biden leads most polls as the Democratic frontrunner. He'll be attending the first state Democratic dinner tonight in Dover, Delaware. Elsewhere in the country, Washington Governor Jay Inslee will be out campaigning in New Hampshire. Senator Amy Klobuchar will be in Iowa, and Senator Bernie Sanders is set to rally in Nevada. Eric?
Yeah, got a baker's dozen, I guess, to keep watching. We'll see if someone else joins in pretty soon. Jeff, thank you. And, of course, you can catch one of the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates will be on Fox News Sunday tomorrow. Chris Wallace will talk with South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He's the youngest candidate to enter the field so far. The program and interview airs at 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern here on the Fox News Channel. And you can check your local listings to see where it airs on your local Fox station where you live.
Well, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell expected to hold a procedural vote on the Green New Deal by the end of this month. But some Democrats are calling this a political stunt, accusing Senator McConnell of testing their support. And here is the Republican from Kentucky on that accusation.
Most Democratic candidates for president and most Democratic senators and congressmen will say they're capitalists. But I think the important thing to look at is not what they say, but what they're doing. Another example is the Green New Deal, which we've been talking about and we'll talk about some more. Watch what they do, not what they ultimately say.
And joining me now, Democratic strategist Scott Bolden and John Thomas, Republican pollster and founder and president of Thomas Partners Strategies. Good to have both of you.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you. John, you're up first this time. What is Senator McConnell's strategy, his goal, and will the plan work the way he hopes it will?
Well, it's a brilliant move, actually, because as the senator said in that warm-up package, quotes are one thing. Quotes are something that these candidates, especially the Democratic primary candidates, can walk back as they go into a general election saying they've evolved their positions. They didn't really mean that. But votes are a whole nother animal. And so it's important, I think, both to peg a lot of these senators like Senator Harris and others to say they actually support this Green New Deal, which, by the way, is wildly unpopular with the mainstream electorate that's going to decide the presidential election. So that's an important strategic thing. And so I think it's going to go actually perfectly as planned.
So, Scott, I mean, if the idea is to force the Dems to show their hands either in support of a Green New Deal against it or in favor of some modified version. How might this trip up some of the Democratic lawmakers?
Well, I know the Republicans certainly want to trip the Democratic lawmakers up, but I think it's a dangerous strategy. Here's the deal, because the majority of Americans believe in global warming and that it's man-made. The reality is that the Democrats are going to vote present because that's their response to this political maneuvering by McConnell. The reality is, though, there are a lot of Republicans and Democrats that support reducing the carbon footprint, and that the Green Deal is a broad conceptual piece on how you get to an emission-free piece. It's not legislation. And so all you have is this process of going through with this resolution. I don't see how the Republicans expand their base with independents and Democrats by doing this maneuver.
Here's the problem, Scott. You call it broad and conceptual. I think you know that it's toxic to voters in those key swing states. But here's the problem with voting present. That may work fine for Democratic senators who don't have their name on a ballot in a Democratic primary, but senators like Harris and Booker and others will get lambasted from the left of their primary base if they don't vote their values, and that's voting for this deal. So they're kind of damned if they do, they're damned if they don't.
Maybe, but the reality is this. Hold on one second. The reality is this. They can vote present and explain that vote, but on the campaign trail, whether they're running for president or running in a particular state, whether it's a red state or blue state, they can advocate for this Green Deal or parts of it, or to add more to it, so that because they're clearly, it's on their mind. And for Democrats, the environment is a big issue, so they don't necessarily have to vote for it up or down. The House has done that already, and on the campaign trail, they've said they support this.
So I'm going to wrap up by saying that the Green New Deal strives for net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. while creating millions of, quote, good jobs, high-wage jobs, all right? Scott, I want you to tell me why this is a good deal, and then, John, you'll tell me why it's not good for Americans. People are watching. They want to know what's the fuss.
Sure. Well, the Republicans have made it a big fuss. Listen, we've got a real problem with emissions. We've got a real problem with global warming. Every scientist, the majority of them, have described this. Obviously, the voters, we know the 80% or more support doing something about it, and it's man-made. The Republicans are in denial. We know under the Obama administration, new energy deals created thousands of jobs. And as a goal here, if we can get started on reducing these emissions, it's going to create a lot of jobs, union jobs and otherwise. So we shouldn't be afraid of it. But there's a lot more to it. These are broad outlines right now.
All right, John, what do you say?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is just basically advocates for larger government control, telling individuals what they can and can't do with their lives. I would disagree with Scott that union leaders from the it just, what it does is it's regulating things from the fact that perhaps we shouldn't be allowed to eat hamburgers, that our beef consumption might be adding to CO2 gas emission. It's the kinds of cars we can drive.
Well, it's not so much.
By the way,
John,
it dictates that there be high-speed rail
one quick
nationally.
Second, John.
How are we going to pay for that? That means the government's going to have to tax.
We certainly have to figure it out.
John, I don't know if you're old enough to know, but maybe you remember back in the 70s, if you got behind a car, shame on you, because that thing was just killing you with the exhaust. I mean, that's actually a good thing for me, for you, driving behind them, for the environment, right? I mean, that's what this is about.
Hey, John, can I ask you a question? What's the
technology in
Republican
the market can solve? Technology in the market can solve that. But look, even union leaders like the president of the AFL-CIO have written letters to AOC saying this is a disaster. It will hurt our jobs. The bigger electoral problem with this is this Green New Deal is essentially saying that coal workers and miners, blue-collar workers, that their jobs will be obsolete.
But here's the thing, and Scott,
if they pass this measure.
The coal miners don't have jobs now. Coal is archaic.
First of all, there's technologies like clean coal and others, and of course, have jobs, and there are
guys, you're talking over each other, so I can't hear. Nobody can hear anything, so we're going to end it there.
John, what's the Republican plan?
We don't want anyone to lose their jobs. I heard what you said, Scott, that coal miners are losing their jobs now because we don't rely on coal so much anymore. So we hope that these people can get other work, of course.
Exactly. I agree with that.
But thank you both. I have to leave it there. Scott Bolden and John Thomas. And I'll talk to you both again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, President Trump yet again slamming the Russia probe because it, quote, illegal and conflicted. As uncertainty looms over whether the Attorney General Bill Barr will be swayed by that House vote 40-20 to zip to release the report completely, as there is a new call now to probe the DOJ handling of Hillary Clinton's email.
Robert Mueller could be approaching the end game in his investigation, and just days ago, after the House voted unanimously to make his report's findings public, the president tweeting earlier today on the recent non-binding vote, 420-0, in Congress about releasing the Mueller report. I told leadership to let all Republicans vote for transparency. Makes us all look good and doesn't matter. Play along with the game. David Spunt is live in Washington with more on what else is going on in the special counsel investigation right now. David.
Arthel, that vote in Congress is a non-binding resolution, but it's a message that Congress, a bipartisan Congress, wants this report to be made public. Now, this week was especially busy for special counsel Robert Mueller and his team. Paul Manafort was sentenced to 7.5 years behind bars. Roger Stone's trial date is now on the books for November, and Manafort Deputy Rick Gates continues to cooperate with authorities. But we are also learning through new court documents that the late Senator John McCain from Arizona and an associate made public an unverified dossier that alleged Russians had compromising information on now President Trump, known as the Steele dossier, funded by the Democratic National Committee. Former Senator John McCain denied being the source for a BuzzFeed article after the dossier was published on the internet. However, we are learning that McCain did provide part of that dossier, specifically the first 33 pages back in 2016, the end of 2016. Meanwhile, Paul Manafort sits in jail this afternoon. Now, if the president were to pardon Paul Manafort, he's still not out of the woods by any means. Earlier this week, Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance announced a 16-count indictment against Manafort with charges mirroring the federal ones that he faced from Virginia. President Trump would not have the authority to get Manafort out of those New York State charges if he's found guilty there. Arthel, no word specifically when the Mueller report will be released, but when it does get released, it will first go to the Attorney General, Bill Barr, then we'll see if made public. But certainly, Congress wants it to be made public 420-0. Arthel.
Yes, sir. David Spunt, thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, that House resolution went over to the Senate and it hit a wall. That wall called Lindsey Graham. The Judiciary Committee chairman also wants the Attorney General to appoint a second special counsel to investigate allegations of Justice Department misconduct over the way it handled Hillary Clinton's emails. John Sale, former assistant special Watergate prosecutor and former special assistant to the Attorney General, joins us right now. John, first on the Mueller report, 420-0. It can't get much stronger than that. Do you think the Attorney General will weigh any of that at all, whether he decides what to release or not to release in terms of the full report?
Yeah. Well, Eric, I'm sitting in Miami where I live and practice, and people here are enjoying the beach, enjoying playing golf. Of course, watching your show, I don't think they're preoccupied with this. But I was in Washington a few days ago on a client matter, and I was astounded by the media interest. And I've got to be back on Monday at the Department of Justice. I'm going to have to walk over reporters. I don't know what they're expecting. Are they expecting a big Brinks truck with guards with a gold box saying Mueller report? The congressional resolution, you probably have to go back to George Washington to find something that's unanimous. It means absolutely nothing. Here's my view. Number one, it's possible that the Attorney General already has the Mueller report. Now, I don't know that that's the case, but the people who really know, being the people in Mueller's office and the Attorney General and his small staff, they're not talking. So the only reason I say that's possible is once he gets it, it's a confidential report. So the fact of the transmittal is a non-story because he has to study it and determine what to do with it. And now to get to your question. So I wrote an article which The Hill published, which is called, I'm looking down, William Barr is the right man for the times. And I argued in the Hill article that Barr is going to do the right thing. He's not going to be influenced by polls, by a congressional resolution. He's going to follow the law and the Department of Justice regulations. And there are three things that come to mind. Number one, national security matters, of course, are going to be redacted. Number two, grand jury information he cannot release to the Congress or to the public absent a court order. And number three, I believe White House counsel and possibly Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow and team, the president's personal lawyers, have a right to preview it, not to change it, but in the event they want to assert any privilege. So here's the bottom line. If they assert any privilege, it gets decided by the courts, and we will be terribly frustrated because that litigation, which will go on forever, we will see these redacted pleadings where everyone will speculate and we won't know what's underlying the redactions.
Wow,
so I think Bill Barr is going to do what he thinks is right, and he's going to follow the law and the regs, including the one that James Comey, I think, violated, and that's releasing to anybody information about people who are not indicted.
John, I
think it's going to be a non-event.
That is a terrific, detailed explanation of what we can expect. Senator Lindsey Graham calling for a second special prosecutor to investigate the handling of Hillary Clinton's emails. Former Watergate prosecutor John Seo with us. John, we learned this week that Obama Justice Department blocked any charges against Mrs. Clinton, according to lawyer Lisa Page's testimony. Do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that there should be a prosecutor look into the DOJ's handling of that case?
Well, based upon the limited amount of information that's been released to the public, here's my answer. Secretary Clinton is not above the law. The Department of Justice, the Attorney General, first needs to review all the available evidence and decide if it meets the threshold to conduct an investigation. If it does, he should then decide whether or not the department can do it or they should appoint a special prosecutor. And the Attorney General, I trust, will make that determination. And if both questions are answered in the affirmative, they should do an investigation. And frankly, they should do it without leaking their progress.
Yeah, she's been cleared basically, several times in terms of these investigations and the IG and this sort of thing. But there still is that perception of questioning, perception of some possibility. Do you think that should finally be wrapped up?
Not based on perception. I think it should be based on hard evidence, and the Attorney General is sworn to uphold the Constitution, to enforce the law equally, and if he thinks it meets the threshold, they would apply to anybody, there should be an investigation.
All right, John.
Whether by a special prosecutor or department, leave that up to the AG.
Okay. John Seo, out of time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insight, and have a good trip back to Washington next week.
Thank you.
Of course.
And we will be back 1 hour from now. That's 4 p.m. Eastern.